So we're going to look at how we do multiplying by 10, 100, 1,000 and beyond, and also dividing as well. Okay, now most people are aware that if you're dealing with whole numbers, that the pattern involves adding zeros. However, that pattern doesn't hold true or doesn't work when we start dealing with decimals. So we're going to look at what's really happening, whether it's whole numbers or decimals in this case. So we're going to start by looking at what happens to a number when we multiply by 10. So this bunch over here are going to be multiplied by 10. So the first number that we're going to multiply by 10 is 3.2, whoops, sorry, 26. Let me just go over that. 3.226. So we're going to multiply that by 10. Now what's actually going to happen is that the numbers are going to move. I know a lot of people think about the decimal point moving, but technically the decimal point cannot move. The decimal point lives on a line between the units and the tens. So it can't actually move and go somewhere else in the number. It's the numbers that are moving place. So when we multiply by 10, it means that the numbers are all going to move up one place. Now there's several different ways you can actually do this. Some people just like to sort of bounce them forward, for example. So that means the 3 would go here into the tens part. The 2 would come across and become a unit, and then the others follow behind. So notice if you move the first one, then the rest just follow behind, so it's quite easy to work out. Now let's take another number, and I'll show a slightly different technique. So we're going to look at 0.147. We're still going to multiply that by 10. I'm just going to show a different technique. So we know that these numbers have all got to move one place in this direction. So what I'm going to do, just to make it a bit easier for us to see what's going on, is I'm going to chop this up as if it was place value. So we've got our units, tenths, hundredths, thousands, and so on. Now we don't really care about that 0 because it doesn't mean anything on its own. So we know that these numbers are going to move up. Actually, I need to extend those lines down just a little bit. And some people find it useful to put a line like this across so they can see the difference between the original and the answer. So 1 is going to move up one place and the others are going to follow behind. And then we can see that the decimal point is on this line here. So our answer is 1.47. Okay, so one more time with this. So we're going to start with 0.8. I'm going to put the line in. We've only got really one line to worry about here. So we're going to move that 8 up one place to here. We don't bother with the decimal point in this case because 8 as 8 units doesn't need a decimal point behind it. So now let's look at the same numbers, same plan, but with multiplying by 100. Whoops, sorry. So we're going to take this same number. So we've got 3.226. I'm going to use this strategy because I think it works nicely. So put the lines in here. Now we need to move this number up 2 places. So I'm actually going to create a couple of extra lines there in front. Sorry, I always seem to forget to do them longer. Right, so we'll do that, just make it easier. So that 3 is going to move 2 places this time. It's easy to remember how many places to move because it's the same as the number of zeros. And then the rest of the number follows behind. And the decimal point was here, so it's still there in the answer. So let's tackle 0.147. So again, let's put the lines in. Okay, and we need to move this 1 forward 2 places. So it's going to go to here. The 4 follows, and so does the 7, and the decimal point stays exactly where it was before. One more time then, so we've got 0.8. So we'll put a line in here. Oops, let's come down a bit further. So that 8 has to move 2 places over here. That 8 has now moved into the tens column, so it means 80. So to make sure that it says 80, we need to fill in a 0 behind it so that it looks like the number 80. So if you get numbers that travel across here and you have a space between the end of the number and the decimal point, you need to fill in with zeros. Okay, so I'm sure you can guess that multiplying by 1,000 just means that everything moves 3 places this time. So we're just going to demonstrate it on the same numbers again. So we've got 3.226. This time we need 3 spaces to move it into. Sorry, that's a little bit crowded. And here we go. So that 3 is going to go from the units to the tens to the hundreds. It's going to end up in the thousand. 3 jumps, 1, 2, 3. The other numbers follow behind. And because this is where the decimal point is, we wouldn't put that in the answer. The answer is just 3,226. So let's do it on the other 2 examples as well. So we've got 0.147. Again, everything's moving up 3 places. So remember, we're really not worried about that 0 because it doesn't mean anything when it's on the front like that. So it's that 1 that I'm going to move. So it goes 1, 2, 3 places. So it's now in the hundreds. The 4 and the 7 follow. I've got nothing after the decimal place left, so it's just 147. Okay, so last one here, we're going to do 0.8. So again, set up our lines. So that 8 has got to travel 3 places forward. 1, 2, 3. Now, the decimal point's over here. That 8 is in here, which is units, tens, hundreds. So to make it into 800, we need to put in those zeros behind, like so. Okay, so now we're going to look at dividing by 10, 100, and 1,000, which works in a very similar way. The key difference, of course, is that the numbers are now going to go in the opposite direction because, generally speaking, dividing makes numbers smaller, doesn't it? So let's look, we're going to use some different numbers here, but we're going to start with dividing by 10 again. So our first number that we're going to look at is 92. So we can still use the same sort of strategy, but the difference is here. We need to understand that when we've got a whole number, the decimal point lives right after it. And we're going to have to put extra room for our answer behind it this time instead of in front of it. And for that reason, sometimes people find it easier to move the number backwards. So move the 2 back and then put the 9 or the other numbers in front of that. So the decimal point hasn't moved. So 9.2 is the answer. Okay, so next one we're going to have a go at is 6, just the number 6. So decimal point, remembers, on that line. We want to move it 1 place, so we'll give it space for that. So that 6 is going to move from here to here, so it's now in the tenths column. The decimal point is there. And in this country, it's conventional for us to put a 0 in front of the decimal point. One last example. So we're going to start this time with 0.34. So again, I'm going to put in the lines and an extra one because we're moving along this way. So the 4 moves back 1, the 3 moves back 1. Now the decimal point's over here. So that 3 is supposed to be in the hundredths. It won't stay there if we don't put a 0 in here to keep the numbers in place. And then of course we put 1 here as well. And the reason why we usually have 1 in front of the decimal point is because normally a decimal point is so teeny tiny you could miss it. So we have that there, and it kind of highlights that there might be a decimal point around. So let's look at this. We're dividing by 100. So I'm sure you've guessed that the only difference is that it's going to move 2 places this direction instead. Okay, so we're going to use the same numbers again. So we've got 92. There's the decimal point. We need 2 places over here to move it back into. So now the 2 is going to move 1, 2 into the tenths. The 9 is going to move 1, 2 here. Decimal points here. So we just stick a 0 in front of it. We've got our 6. We want to move it back 2 places. Remember, our decimal point is here. Always lives at the end of the whole numbers, the units, and before the tenths. So we move the 6, 1, 2 places back. Decimal points here. To keep this 6 in the right position, namely the hundredths, we need to put a 0 in here, and we pop the 1 on the front. So again, starting with 0.34. So moving back 2 places here again. So the 4 goes back 2, the 3 goes back 2. The decimal point hasn't moved at all. So we need to fill in with 2 zeros here now to keep the numbers in the correct places. And there's our answer. So finally, let's just do dividing by 1,000. So everything's going to move 3 places this time. So we've got our 92 and 3 extra places. Remember that decimal point is living there. So the 2 is going to go back 1, 2, 3 places. The 9 is going to go in front of it, just as it was before. Decimal points here, so we're adding a 0 to keep these in their place, and a 0 on the front. 6, back 3 places. Decimal points living here. The 6 goes 1, 2, 3 places. The decimal point is still here, so we need to fill in with zeros there and 1 on the front. Okay, and finally 0.34. Also going back 3 places, so the 4's going back here, the 3 to here. The decimal point is still here, so this time we need 3 zeros to keep the numbers in their places. So that's multiplying and dividing by 10, 100 and 1,000. Really important skills to understand and master because they come up in lots of different types of questions.